Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Horizonte, an event series that focuses on trending topic and latest developments. Our last edition took place earlier this year and was about open innovation and its use in project design and implementation. Innovation is the common theme and it touches upon every topic in every sector, food being no exception. Innovation is the underlying engine that pushes us to evolve. Tonight we will focus on innovative ideas and trends in the food sector. But before we start, I would like to invite the Director General of Advantage Austria, Michael Otter, for his opening remarks.
Well, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear representatives from the food industry from all over the world, we have representatives from more than 25 countries here among us today. They join us tomorrow at the marketplace to talk about B2B opportunities. Dear food lovers, welcome at today's conference where we discuss one of the most intriguing topics for all of us in life, the most connecting topic in life. We discuss about food, about beverages, about nutrition. We want to discuss the future of food. From our perspective, as we mentioned in the introduction, the future means mainly new markets, exploring export opportunities for Austrian companies. The future means also new technologies and innovation, finding new opportunities for Austrian companies to explore from all over the world, finding new chances, finding new knowledge, finding new partners where they connect, to know where some industry is heading to. And in this context, we want to discuss today, what will the future of food, what will food look like in 30, 50 years? What implication does this bring us for industry? What implication does this bring us for our international partners? But what implication, challenges, and also opportunity does this bring to our Austrian companies? Let me give you just two brief examples. We all know that the growing world population is one of the most important topics amongst other topics like climate change, but the growing world population is one very important topic in the world. And according to some studies, there will be more than 10 billion people living on this planet in 2050. And in this context, many scientists, but also many companies and industries, and some countries are further than others, for example, are discussing algae as natural resource for food. As we all know, algae can be harvested in the ocean, but also can be cultivated in some artificial environment. So this could be one of the future food sources humankind can use, and we could save a lot of resources, changing from classical farming, classical livestock farming, to algae. Is it an opportunity, a threat, is it a chance? These are some topics we could discuss tonight. Another example. Imagine yourself being in a supermarket with your hand, with an application on your cell phone, And you walk through and you immediately test the freshness of the product. So the app will give you immediately information, how fresh is the fish, how fresh is the meat, how fresh are the vegetables you're trying to buy. And there is a startup, there are some couple of startups working on these solutions worldwide, because they immediately check through the barcoding system, but also through the cameras on the cell phone, the weight, the size, the color of the fish, of the meat, the softness of the meat, and it gives you immediate feedback. How fresh is the product you want to buy? Now imagine incorporating this in the value chain. So the products maybe, the supermarket knows immediately which product suits the quality criteria. So automatically these products will be sorted out of the shelves when the product doesn't fit anymore in the usual quality system of the product. So these are just a few examples, and I think we discussed many of these possible topics tonight, of how the food industry, the food we eat, is changing. About how the logistics is changing, the quality is changing, and about how we perceive food, how we as humans perceive food is changing. As I mentioned, there will be a lot of challenges, especially for us companies. There will be new regulations, there will be new standards, there will be new ideas about how we can interfere in the trade flow of goods. But there will be also huge challenges, opportunities. And I think these opportunities are what we're all looking for. When talking about the Austrian companies, I'm convinced the Austrian companies are in a very good shape to face these challenges, but also to use these opportunities. And when I'm traveling around in the world, and some people ask me, how would you describe Austria? Not only Austria, but Austria as the Austrian economy. And I usually refer to them, the best what you can imagine is the Austrian companies, because they stand for long-standing partnerships, they stand for high quality, and they stand for family-owned businesses which really focus on innovation. And having said that, I think Austrian companies are in a very good shape, in a very good position to face the future, and in that sense, welcome again to Marketplace. Thank you very much for coming, and I wish you a very interesting evening talking about the future of food. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I also would like to point out that this conference is not an isolated event. Future of Food is also featuring this month on our website innovateaustria.org, and we run a big number of events overseas with this topic, the future of food in general. Allow me now to introduce to you Mrs. Verena Kuhn, CEO and founder of 1030 Innovation, whose team has curated tonight's event together with us, and who will be your moderator for tonight. Ms. Kuhn, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to moderate this event tonight, where we will look at possible solutions for the future of food and how we will eat in 2050. We have an impressive lineup of speakers, and one thing is for sure, that we will see some very nice, inspiring examples in the next 2.5 hours. We're talking about the year 2050. And honestly, we don't have a crystal ball telling us exactly how the future will look like. But there are things that we will be using in the future, in the decades to come. They are already here. They already exist now. There are pioneers out there who are experimenting with some very cutting-edge solutions. If you look at these walls in this room, you see creations by a food printer, a 3D food printer. This might be one way of putting our everyday food. Maybe some appliances like this will be in our kitchens in a decade or so. But what I want to say is, ultimately, it's on us to spot those new promising developments around the globe, get inspired by them, and ultimately shape the futures ourselves. And Peter Drucker once said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Question is, how can we, with our busy lives, spot all these interesting cutting-edge developments that are still a little bit under the radar around the globe? How can we do that? And a great approach to that is to look at trends. And we heard it earlier already in the introduction. The Austrian Chamber of Commerce is doing a lot into this direction. They have this fantastic website, Innovate Austria, that features a lot of those trends on different topics, including food. And our next speaker is a trend expert. She joined us all the way from Amsterdam. She's a TED talker and one of the most inspiring people I know. Honestly, Cécile, that's true. Welcome on stage, Cécile Cremer, founder of Wondering the Future, president of the global trend network La Futura. Cécile will share with us some cutting-edge developments that are still a little bit under the radar, but have the potential to become the next big thing in the food industry. Cécile, stage is yours. It's a pleasure. So I hand over the point of...
Thank you so much, and thank you for this introduction. The bar is high now, but I'll do my best. So, we are talking about the future on so many levels, and there are subjects that we think are so urgent, like technology and climate change and all those kinds of things. But I think we often forget one subject, and that is food. Who's with me that food might be one of the most interesting subjects of the 21st century? So our world is changing exponentially, and I think I don't have to tell you guys that that means that we are going faster and faster and faster. If you look back at the last 60 years, then the last 10 years of those 60 years in development and innovation were as fast as the 50 years before. And if we look into the future, we already know that the upcoming 3 years there will be as many innovations as the 10 years before. So we're going faster and faster and faster. And we also already know that technology has a huge impact and a huge play in everything we do nowadays. A little test. Who had his phone in his or her hands like 10 minutes ago? Nobody? Oh yeah. And like 5 minutes ago? And right now? And who didn't hear this question because they are texting with somebody? Also on food, technology will have a huge impact, both positive and negative. And today I want to take you onto a little trip through the future of food. But a little bit about the now, a little bit about the later, and a little bit for thought. So what is happening actually in our world? Because there are so many challenges going on if we talk about food. Think about that a lot, because at the moment we are not hungry, but if we don't make a change, in a few years it might be us as well. But also the fact that our food habits are actually highly destructive for our resources, for our bodies, for our world. What about meat, for example? We all know it isn't that good for our environment, but we still do like our piece of meat. And that isn't a bad thing, but it's a thing that we should become more aware of. And then the fact that we sometimes eat ourselves sick, especially here in the Western world, with diseases like obesity or heart and vascular diseases. So actually we know a lot, but it's hard to make those changes right. So is that all there is? Us not behaving so well? No, there isn't, because we already see some signs that we are changing and that we see like, okay, maybe we should do this like a little bit different. So what can we do? What changes can we already see? Can we already detect? And let's start with the now. And although Verena talked about 2050, actually the trends are already here now. the little signals, the little changes, they start here with those innovators, with those pioneers, and then they grow out throughout our whole society, so we can make that change together. Because our values are slowly changing, but really change our behavior, that's a little bit difficult. Let's start with a positive trend today, because we know there are challenges and we know we have to change, but a little bit of positivity, I think that will work the best. The fact is that we are becoming way more healthy again. There's sort of an extreme healthy vibe going on at the moment. For example, and I'm gonna check this because I don't want to lie to you guys, but currently 9.5% of the world population is either vegetarian or vegan. And 1.2% is totally living vegan. And that's quite a lot of people if you realize how many people are living on this earth. So we realize that it's more important every day to think about our health. And moreover, what we eat is also becoming our identity. We know that we cannot just put everything in our mouth and that doesn't say anything about us. So what we eat is more and more who we are. And we see all kinds of new products arising because everybody's being healthy and sporty and we have to take good care of ourselves. So all of a sudden there are so many new ingredients on the market. For example, matcha, charcoal, curcuma. And then we have new products like hydrogen, water, tofu, beer, or even charcoal bread. Because it apparently is healthy for us. And that's a good thing, that we are at least becoming more aware of what we want to eat and what it does to our body. For example, in Amsterdam we have the vegan junk food bar. And what you see is that all those changes in behavior and the changes in human and consumer needs don't have to be dull or grey. They can be within our zeitgeist, within our trends, and it can still be attractive to our younger consumers. Vegan junk food bar is like a junk food bar, but everything is vegan. And I tried some of the food. I had, for example, a chicken salad. And if I didn't know that it was vegan, I wouldn't tell. But the thing is, it's cool, it's spot on, and people love to go there. But it still answers to the need of tomorrow. Or perennial food. This is a very healthy, high-protein drink for the elderly. Because that is also a target group that we often forget. So why only focus on those young hipsters, those cool people that want to be healthy, when there's a whole other target group who are actually with more people. And they also want to be healthy and eat good food. But what I also said is that what we eat is also our identity. This is a good example. Delete to feed. We all put our foods on Instagram, right? Or at least we have done it before. And this campaign actually says like, if you delete your food pictures on Instagram, then we donate food to people who cannot afford it. So it's quite a statement to say, okay, I delete that picture, but I know I can feed somebody else. And again, you make a statement. You form your identity through a food example. But let's also be honest that we are living in 2019, almost 2020, and nobody has time. We want it faster, we want it now, it has to be convenient, it has to be fast. Time is the new currency. Who had to wait today for a bus or a train or a colleague that was late or maybe a phone call who didn't call on time? Anybody? See some hands. How did that make you feel? Did it make you feel happy or were you like, oh. I think in our world, at this moment, we are all not so fond on losing time. And we can see that in our products as well, because we don't want to spend time on the must-dos. Cooking is not something regular anymore. Grocery shopping should be fast, convenient, and maybe even delivered to our doors. Food concepts should unburden us, should give us time, and should make life easier. We can see the numbers of food delivery rising. We can see the numbers of products in supermarkets that are convenient and ready also rising. Time is pressure, so we need to hurry up. Some of you might know this example. It's all the way from Shanghai. It's actually the old supermarket that went through our streets in a new jacket. So as you will see in a minute. It's a supermarket on demand. You can just order this with your mobile phone. It will drive somewhere in the area. Fully automatic. You will check in with your mobile phone. There are no people inside.
Hello, Miranda. Welcome back.
You'll just pick whatever you need or want. You pay with your phone and you check out again. So convenient, fast, and also pretty cool. But let's seek it a little bit more home for me. This is in Schiphol, the airport of Amsterdam, and there we have a Deliveroo Terminal A. So you can just go to the airport, wait for your flight, and you just order Deliveroo and it will be brought to you in the airport. Maybe the question, is it convenient or are we becoming a little bit lazy? But that's another discussion, of course. This is more of an art project, but also really spot on our current zeitgeist. This is a designer from Tel Aviv, and he said, how can we be more sustainable, but also be faster and more convenient? And he designed sous la vie. This is a meal in a little bag, which you put in your washing machine. So when you do your washing, you can also do your cooking. So you use less water, less electricity, less energy, and also less time. So when your wash is done, your food is as well. Of course, this might not be the most handy solution, but the thought behind it, that we really have to think about our resources and how we use stuff, I think it's really brilliant. But with this fast changing world, we also see the downside of things, namely loneliness, and not only amongst the others. But there's a good thing, because food is actually really a connector. It's not only the thing that keeps us alive, which is really important, but it's also the thing that connects people to each other. And the numbers of lonely people are rising, amongst elderly, amongst youngsters. We stay alone longer. There are more one-person households, but also the fact that the elderly can stay home longer means that they more often are alone. And actually food can solve this as well. And that's, I think, maybe the most beautiful thing about it. This is a nose bowl. It's also really a design product, but I think the thought behind it's really good. We should look into one-person products, not only in food and packaging, but also this is a nose bowl. It's from José de la O. He's from South America, and he made that bowl and said, so many people that are living alone and eating alone are eating on a couch or on the bed, and their posture is changing from how we used to sit behind a table and on a chair. So he said it should be convenient that you can eat alone and it's nothing to be ashamed of. But if you then not want to feel alone, we make a little nose on top of the bowl. So then you have the idea that you're not alone. And of course it's a bit strange, but it's, I think, a really great opportunity to dive into those products of people eating alone and how can you make that more social or more convenient for them. And the other great example is from Japan. Because a lot of people do not have kitchens in Japan. I think most people know that there are like really, really tiny houses over there. So the first thing they leave out is a kitchen. And now they are building sort of collective community kitchens where people can cook together, eat together, and therewith also support that social vibe amongst food. So you don't have to cook alone, you don't have to eat alone. Although you don't have a kitchen, just come to Subia and we'll make something together. So what about a little bit further into the future? Because all those challenges we talked about, we need to solve them. We need to solve them together. Because if we don't do anything, as I said before, we might be hungry in a bit. And some say plant-based food is the future, others say lab food is the future, but do we actually know? We cannot deny that just eating less meat will solve all our problems. And tech is a necessity in this problem. I don't think it's the answer, but it's at least a tool that can help us. We already made the first cultural hamburger, and we printed food, and it's actually not so strange anymore. But do we need more tech to secure the future of food, or do we maybe need more behavioral change? Or is it a combination of both? So science foodie. It's actually a combination of our current trends, extreme healthy and quantify self. Because the good thing is people want to know what they eat, what it's doing to their body more and more. We just not put everything in our mouth anymore. Food becomes more personal, and that's also because of technology. Because not everybody needs the same ingredients. They often say it's one size fits all. I never understood that with clothes, but also not with food. And food becomes way more personal. So we see the first tattoos that you can put on that will measure exactly what you need. This is from Proteus. So it measures what kind of ingredients you need, how your blood is, and then you can eat exactly what you need. But, I need to go back. But the fact that we have all these solutions means also that we have to get them to the consumer. Because we can make the strangest things and use the most weird or extraordinary ingredients, but it's eventually the normal person that needs to eat it. Brasserie 2050, as you can hear, it's Dutch. It's a festival, Lowlands. It's actually a very normal, regular festival. And they put this brasserie with algae food, 3D printed food, the cultured meat, all kinds of stuff, but really in a very laid-back environment for people to try. And the reactions and the responses of the consumer were so great, because they thought, okay, it's actually not that bad. If I can try it in this kind of environment, I might be open to eat insects or to eat algae or something that I don't know, because it's not that bad at all. This was Sushi Singularity. Some of you might have heard about it, but this is sushi, 3D printed, based on your pee. Sounds strange, but... So you actually, before you go to the restaurant, you hand in some feces and some pee, and they will research it and see exactly what you need. And it sounds a bit... It's opening in 2020 in Shanghai as well, so you might want to go there. But it shows how personal food can be and how we can really look what one person needs. And then we maybe also can decide that we don't have to overproduce anymore, because we know exactly what everybody would need. And then we have, of course, the Impossible Burger, the first soya burger that officially bleeds. So if we have the thing that, I don't want to eat meat or fake meat because it doesn't bleed, this one bleeds. And then we also have meat that is actually really meat, but we don't have to slaughter animals for it. So this is clean lab meat from a cow. We just take one cell and we turn it into meat. So there are so many solutions already that we can make food and don't have to destroy our world for it. And now the fun part, because we're talking about 2050. But we cannot say that much about it. Just think in scenarios. Because what if the future of food of 2050 would be foodless? So we stand up in the morning and we walk out of our beds into a scan, and it will just feed us everything we need. So then there are no problems anymore. It's all high tech. Or we just take a pill once in our life, filled with robots, with all the ingredients we need. Just one pill and all our problems would be gone. But then we solve a problem and we create a new one, because we do want to go out. We do want to eat our grandmother's grand pie. We don't want all those chef cooks, like those chefs, to be without a job. And we do want all the social aspects. And there are enough answers and there are enough solutions that can solve our biggest challenges without really having to lose that fun of food. So who's in charge? Technology or humanity? I say let us humans be in charge, because the future is still open and we are at a point where we can still decide how we are going to do it. And we really need to make some changes. But only making changes through behavioral change won't be enough. So I think a good balance between the technological solutions and the human smartness will help us feed our future stomachs tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cécile, for this wonderful journey into the future. Now, we would like to have a look at a variety of aspects that Cécile has touched upon already. But we want to give it a structure for tonight's event. And we want to look at these topics in a little bit more detail and explore some innovations in these areas. Let's start with the basics. We have a lot of problems at our doorstep. This is why sustainable supply and also health are really basic things to discuss. Then we have a look at technology and how it can help us to augment our food experience. And last but not least, two topics, culture and experience. They have always been connected to food, and they always will, but in a different way, most probably. We've seen those figures, and we've heard them already in the introduction. So, in 2050, our world population is going to hit the 10 billion threshold. Climate change, global warming, will lead to less agricultural land. So it's very clear, and Cécile has mentioned it, and also we heard it earlier in the talks, that if we keep producing and consuming food the way we do now, we won't be able to feed the 10 billion on our planet. So, sustainable food supply seems probably the biggest challenge of mankind right now. But the good news is there are people out there who are actually developing solutions to fight these challenges that are at our doorstep. A variety of startups have developed some very smart solutions, and we would like to have a look at some of them today. Meat is the elephant in the room, and it really is. But if meat is no longer a broad-scale solution, what will we eat then? What kinds of proteins are good alternatives? So let's discuss the future of proteins with some experts now. And I would like to welcome on stage Anneliese Schmiedinger, co-founder of Helga, standing for Healthy Algae, an Austrian startup producing and marketing algae-based nutrition. And then Philipp Stangl, co-founder and CEO of Rebel Meat, an Austrian startup producing hybrid meat. And you will explain to us what that means in a second, I'm sure. And then, last but not least, Samuli Taskila came all the way from Finland. And he's the CEO of the startup Entis, who are developing insect-based products. So my first question goes to Philipp. Thank you. My first question goes to Philipp. So in the light of recent developments, and we heard it numerous times today, do you think meat has a future?
It definitely does. So thank you very much first for having me. There are several ways in which we need to change, though, how we produce and how we consume meat, definitely. And technology is definitely one thing. Another option is just behavior change, as we heard. So yes, we need to eat less and we need to eat better. And there is a growing trend also towards more sustainable methods of growing meat. There is a trend towards more transparency. People demand it on the one hand. And we will probably also see some regulatory push. If you start having CO2 taxes and so on, people will, be incentivized to go for better options. So what is important to understand, though, is that things cannot happen from one day to the next. So there will be a transition period. And that's why we also believe that hybrid or blended meat will be important in that transition period to basically prepare people to eat less meat. Also, not only the early adopters, but the big majority. And we heard the numbers, right? We have 10% vegetarians and vegans, with 90% people still eat
non-vegetarians. Right.
So we will need to take those people on a journey and basically create real, viable, everyday options, and not options that they probably feel appelled to or that are too strange for many people.
Right. So I think you mix it 50-50, right? So you have 50% meat, and it's ethically sourced, as you said. What's the rest of it?
So we take the highest quality organic grass-fed beef available, and we mix it with high-quality, all-natural plant-based ingredients. So that's mostly mushrooms. And basically, the idea is really to create 100% meat-like experience with only 50% of meat. And I guess what differentiates us from plant-based meat replacement products is that we don't use any highly processed ingredients. We don't use any additives or anything like this. We use all regional and organic ingredients. And I think that's what basically creates that kind of feeling, okay, we can be pragmatic, right? We don't have to give up on all the habits and on the meat we love. We just need to eat less but better. And I think that's kind of what creates a real option for many people, and that's why we do 50%. And by the way, speaking about 2050, but this is something that you can try afterwards outside.
Yeah, right. I wanted to mention that, of course. So give it a try later on this evening. Last question. What are you working on? So there's, now you do 50-50, mainly mushrooms and ethically sourced meat. What's the future for you?
Yeah, so there's two things, right? On the one hand, we want to bring further down the meat ratio and increase the product line. So that's something that we can do in the very short term. There is a bigger vision for us, though, also behind all of this. And we heard cultured meat or clean meat, basically meat grown in labs or bioreactors. And when this is coming to market in, let's say, 5 to 10 years, it won't come on our plates in the pure form because it will be very expensive and it will not have the taste, texture, optics, etc. to be consumer grade. So it will also have to be blended with plant-based materials. So that's exactly what we do right now, and we're basically preparing the technology and the market entrance, and we'll have the perfect brand to basically bring clean meat to market once it's market ready.
Oh, thank you so much, Philipp. Another protein that is very popular already in other cultures, but not here, are insects. In the Western world, we have kind of a disconnect with eating insects. And if I imagine putting a cockroach into my mouth, probably not such a good feeling, but I've learned that it highly depends on how insects are processed and presented. In Samuli, with Entis, you want to make insect-based food more popular, right? So tell us a little bit about your company, and why did you come across insects, and what was your reason to found it?
Yeah, I think why insects, it's like the most frequently asked question I have answered during the past 2 years.
I bet.
Yeah. But mainly there's 4 reasons with insects. First of all, we have history as humans. We have a long history of eating insects. It's like thousands of years. And we have gathered them from the fields and from the forests, and we have been eating them. But in the Western countries, we don't have the culture. And there's 2 billion people around the globe who actually eat insects. So it's already out there. We just have to bring it here. The second thing is of course, the sustainability. It's crazy efficient. If you think about the greenhouse gases, it's 98% less compared to traditional meat. Then if we talk about water and space, it's only a fraction of water and space compared to almost any other protein source available. Then third of all, it's the nutritional value, of course. It's up to 70% of protein, lots of B12 vitamin, lots of iron, lots of zinc, lots of everything pretty much. And the good thing about insects is the amino acid profile also. So you can get all the essential amino acids from insects.
Okay.
And then last, even though you wouldn't believe it, it's the taste. So there's almost 2,000 edible insect species in the world. So there's huge untouched potential over there.
So, and if you look at a dish like you do it, I think it looks really delicious. Question is also, how do you cultivate them?
Yeah, so basically, if you look at the picture, we don't actually want to show the visible insects in any of our products, because it's we cannot really change the biology, or we cannot change the deepest fears we have. So in the Western countries, insects are seen as pests, and if you see insect, something happens in your brain, and we cannot really change it. So the most important thing we actually do is that we don't show visible insects in our products. Then when it comes to the taste of the product, it's really mild. You know, we can make it taste like pretty much anything. And about the farming, how we cultivate them, it's a really efficient process, because the life cycle is around 5 weeks. And then the feed ratio is really good. We pretty much feed them carrots and cucumbers, which we hope in the future we can use like leftovers and make like a closed circle.
Very
so
nice.
it will be really efficient.
Very nice. One last word about legislation, because it's not legal to sell insects as food in many European countries, I think. And you changed the legislation in Finland, right?
Yeah, so actually I have a background in law. I have been working in a law firm like 4 or 5 years. Nothing to do with insects, basically, but that's you cannot really choose your path all the times. So basically it was illegal to sell insects as food, but I found a little loophole over there. So we started to sell them as a decoration, or as eye candy, as we called it.
Okay.
And then the media got really interested, and also the authorities got really interested. And at the end, they had no chance other than legalize it. And actually, next year, it will be legalized in every European country. There's a novel food application that is submitted, and it should be gone through next year. And after that, it will be legal in every country. Also in Austria, I'm not sure what's actually the current status in Austria. I think it's kind of a gray area still in many countries.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really interesting. We ordered, I mean, we can buy those products online, so if you're interested. And you can, of course, try them tonight, later, outside the room. There will be a little stand where Samuli will give you some bites, some insect bites. So apart from insects and all kinds of new meat, algae is another source, an interesting source of protein. Anneliese, you co-founded Helga, Healthy Algae, a company producing algae-based products. Where do you see the role of algae in the future when it comes to the future of protein?
As we have already heard today, every single study that talks about the question, how do we feed 10 billion people in the future, has algae as one pillar of how to cope with this situation. Why is that? There are two aspects. One is that algae can be grown really sustainably. We don't need agricultural land, but they also grow very fast. So everybody who has a swimming pool knows this. But the reason for it is also very easy to understand. Microalgae, they don't need to grow roots. They don't need to grow structures. So they can use all the energy from the sun just to grow. Mm-hmm. And the second aspect that is very important is the high intensity of nutrients. Like, we talk about proteins today, mm-hmm. not about vitamins, it's in microalgae, 50% of the biomass is protein, whereas in meat, we can go up to 20-30%. Mm-hmm. So that is a benchmark, I think.
Oh, wow, this sounds impressive. So, and also here, we would be interested to see how algae dishes look like. And you've sent me those really nice pictures, and I think it looks delicious. Can you say a bit about algae recipes?
Yeah, in Asia, algae are part of the normal dinner table. Everybody eats them. We also know that from there as sushi or wakame salad. But they also have algae crisps, and they come in a bunch of varieties, and that's comparable to the love of potato chips here in Europe. For microalgae, in Europe, we are at the beginning. So when I started the company 5 years ago, I looked at the market. There were powder, tablets, capsules as dietary supplements, but not food. So that was my motivation to start a company to produce real food. We started with a drink, followed it up with crackers, and there's a bunch of ideas out there. But if I'd like to invite you to experiment yourself with the powder. Algae comes as powder. You can pimp your smoothie, you can put it on muesli, but you can also use it in salty snacks, like in pesto or bread spread. Mm-hmm. So
sounds pretty interesting. So also here, same here, you can try algae-based products later on. So take your chances and taste some Helga. A last question. And I don't know if everybody is aware of that, but you are now part of Felix Austria. I found that really impressive. So congratulations, first of all. How does it feel like?
That feels very good. I think that is one step in the right direction. My vision is that algae-based products are not only exotic anymore, but that they become part of our normal life, part of our daily dinner table, and that you can buy them in every supermarket. And I think that's the right way to do that.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. Great applause for the panelists. Thanks for being here. And don't miss your chances to taste the products later. Thank you so much. So, let's move on to our next topic. More than 50% of the world's population are living in urban areas right now. But this number is expected to rise to 66% in 2050. And we got used to having fresh products from all over the world available, basically 365 days per year. Avocados in November, strawberries in January, it's all there. So we have the full choice. What this created is a food system centered around efficiency, around quantity, and low prices, rather than quality, sustainability, and traceability. And I think it's clear that, as Cécile mentioned earlier, we need to reflect on that and change our behavior, because such an approach does not address at all the challenges that we are facing. So how can we rethink the way we organize our food systems? And vertical farming, food production in cities, is a possible way to do it. And I would like to welcome now probably the Mr. Vertical Farm here in Austria. Where is he? Daniel? Here you go. Daniel Podmirseg, head of the Vertical Farm Institute. Stage is yours, Daniel. So I get you the clicker.
Test. Ah, yeah, it's working. I prepared this one or that one?
No, that one.
Okay. So much stuff for you, and they told me that I don't have 20 but 15 minutes. So therefore, be prepared for a lot of slides. I don't want to talk about so much about the future of farming or the vertical farming. That world map actually shows you very specific building typologies where we already are producing food indoor, which comes very close to the building typology I call a vertical farm. Number one. And number two, what you see here highlighted, we are already investing a bunch of millions and billions of dollars in this new way of food production in the center of the city. A very personal thing, this is all how I started. It was in 2008. I was studying architecture, and I was figuring out, I was always interested in how to increase energy efficiency in architecture and whatnot, and I figured out that 30% of the total primary energy consumption is related to the food sector. And that somehow was the magic moment where that need somehow started in creating a new building typology. This somehow gives you an impression of several buildings we already had a look at, always from an architectural perspective, and also and always intending in how can we lower the energy consumption to net zero. Number one, there's a very specific reason. As you see here, since 1995, we meet on an annual basis. We are talking about the climate, and that curve, what you see on top, is the CO2 curvature. We are not focusing enough on the way in how we are producing food. And in addition, before I started with my dissertation, we consumed 500 exajoule on energy. After my dissertation, it increased by 10%, and I just had a close look on the numbers. 2 days ago, it was already on 576. So it's too late to be a pessimist. And just to address it to Austria, somehow we are all reducing the CO2 emissions on a European level, but Austria is part of the top 5. But on a negative level now, these are the 5 countries where actually CO2 emissions are still increasing. And there is a very specific reason. I mean, to Felix Austria, Austria is a very happy country and we are producing a lot of food, but 40% of the arable land of Austria is somewhere in the world. That picture I just got from Mr. Grömer. All these tiny little dots, what you see up here, are man-made bushfires. Everybody is familiar with. I just would like to show it again and just give you a feeling for the size on that what we are talking about. Why are we doing that? If you have a closer look on the landmass, which is around 150 million square kilometers, and thinking about the biocapacity, world biocapacity for food production, we have to admit that a part of it is simply too cold, too steep, too dry, has bad soil conditions for food production, and the rest is suitable for agriculture. These are the good news, because this is twice as much than the area what we are consuming today for food production. The bad news is that the biggest part of that is under the forests. So it's a matter of scale. 30% is already used for agricultural production from the land surface. It's 176 exajoule. It's a number with 18 zeros. So based on the method, but we are talking about the 30% of the total primary energy supply worldwide is related to the food sector. Same with the CO2 emissions. Has also to do with the arable land, what we need per person. This is 2,312 for the Austrians. For the Chinese, it's around 1,700, rapidly increasing. And this leads to these numbers. Again, 10% arable land. So we have to prepare for the future needs. And if these numbers are true, what we have heard today, so if we will be 10 billion people somewhere in 2050 or 75, in addition, just arable land, we need the surface of Australia. These are some desperate tests in producing food. Here on top of it you have Riyadh. We are producing food with 50,000-year-old rock water. That tiny little area is Manhattan, just to get a feeling for the size. This is the biggest greenhouse worldwide. It's Almeria in the south of Spain. And this is Vienna, and this is Bratislava, and this is a myth. Somehow Vienna is very proud of the Marfeld because we are getting all our food from that area. But to be honest, all that area we need just for the 6th district in Vienna compared to the area. On the other side, in the 20th century, our farmers have been pretty cool in increasing the yield per hectare. So world population tripled, the cultivation area doubled, and the energy harvested increased 6-fold. But there was a heavy price to pay, and this has to do with CO2 emissions. The energy subsidies increased by 8,500%, and most of it is hydrocarbon energy. So a third of it is related to the food sector. Of course, distributed to production, transport, distribution, processing, retail area, etc., etc. So therefore, I proclaim to use that what we have. Built up land surface, it's around, based on the numbers, but it's around 0.5%. We have to radically think about how can we increase our food production independent from weather conditions throughout the whole year, closing water cycles and energy cycles and the material flows, radically reducing herbicides, pesticides, thinking about real big cities like Shanghai, which is 3 times more than the inhabitants of all Austria again, thinking about geopolitical conflicts and this burden, that pressure from import and export. We radically have to reduce the land surface, and we radically have to reduce the consumption of hydrocarbon energy. And these 2 points up here cost me 5 years of my lifetime. Basically, that was my dissertation. So actually, what I wanted to figure out, is this true, that vertical farms really radically reduce the land use on one side, and does it make sense on an energetic level? I skipped that just to keep that in mind. Yes, it's radically reducing the land surface, what we actually need for the same yield. There's a great example. This is vertical harvest, one of my favorite examples because it has a great socio-economic model behind it. It's in the Rocky Mountains, 1,900 meters high, 6 months of winter, and the rest of the 6 months it's simply cold. That city is importing 98% of the food. And if you have a look on the building footprint of the building itself, so the total yield, what that building actually is producing, is 3% of the whole arable land, what we actually would need alternatively. With all the positive externalities by reduced, I mean, you know about these numbers, I think so. We actually reduced the biomass of insects by 75%, and the birds, these are just numbers of Europe since the 80s. And this is one of the crucial points what I have to highlight. We have to think about how do we substitute natural growth factors. And if we do it in the wrong way, and this is the conclusion of my dissertation, this is beyond somewhere. So you need 400 kilowatt hours per square meter a year. If someone of you is deciding growing tomatoes in the basement, don't do it. But there is something what is very actually interesting. If you think about the growing conditions what actually plants need, and if you have a closer look on the analysis of an already existing building, you start understanding a building with different climate zones. So therefore, each and every climate zone with a daylight distribution actually gives you the opportunity to plant a very specific crop, or insects, or fish, or mushrooms, and whatever dependent on that light what you're actually getting. So, renewable energy is key. This is a research project what we developed for the Seestadt Aspern here in Vienna, where we actually translated the learnings from the academic period before, and this is something what makes it very interesting from my point of view, from an architectural statement. If you get a deeper understanding in the whole food supply chain, and you translate that into a function and space program of a building, you're creating a completely new building typology where you're actually reducing the overall energy consumption on a massive scale. I skipped that. This is too detailed for this hour. Another building, what we had a closer look at, which most likely will be built now in 2024, is a combination between a school next to Vienna with a vertical farm concept. And what is interesting here, also in how do we bring people together, how can we create new business models, is it's getting interesting and very specific for every city when we understand the vertical farm as a structural element of the urban system. The way we are working, this is the only thing what that slide wants to highlight. Each and every design step is directly related to a simulation definition where we actually immediately see from the very beginning if we are going in the right direction or not, talking about energy consumption, operative energy, etc., etc. What makes it very interesting is when we think about hybrid building, sometimes I call it the hyper building, when we actually combine food production with temporary living, like a hotel, co-working spaces, gastronomy, markets, etc., etc. This gives you the opportunity to use a lot of synergy potentials between, if you think about the year with 8,760 hours, where each and every zone has a very specific need in heat and light, etc., etc. Skip that too. I just want to infect your retina a little bit. This is also a proposal what we made for the Tabakfabrik in Linz. So also when we think about vertical farming, by the way, vertical farming communicating to the outside, for us it's everything but the O level. So it's also about activating the rooftops or the facades, etc., etc. So also interesting gives you a lot of possibilities in combining food production with energy production. This is a competition what we won in June now, which will be built, where Katharina is also part of Livin Farms. So actually it's an old building ensemble from the 19th century where we now are activating already existing building blocks just by thinking about embodied energy. How important is that? Of course it is important, so there is a lot of spaces in the city what immediately could be activated for food production. So we are producing insects here, microgreens, mushrooms, fish. We also have, for the romantics of us, we have some organic farming in there. And this is my Trojan's horse here in the center of it, my vertical farm with a overview platform and the worldwide first vertical snail farms. So just to infect your retina again, so food production, the social engagement and the circular economy are three very important parameters for the design process. And now, just to conclude, this is one of my heroes, guys. We are no longer talking about the future. The oldest vertical farm, which still exists, is here in Vienna, and you all can visit it if you want to. It stands in Kurbach-Oberla, built in 1974. This was a vertical farm from the same company, set up in 1964, so it was 10 years before the first publications came out in, where we actually start to understand how photosynthesis is working. What is photosynthetic active radiation? What is a photosynthetic photon flux density, etc., etc. So these have been the real pioneers already a half a century ago. This is how it looks today. Now, this is the son of the inventor, where we scanned in 3,200 dias. So they set up 29 vertical farms worldwide, from Canada to Moscow, etc., etc. So this building now will be refurbished, where we bring all the Viennese pioneers together, and we will produce fish, mushrooms, insects. I don't know what I forgot. Well, basically, we are producing everything in there, yeah? So, long story short, I just would like to show you some of the slides of that whole company, so where they already had a very deep understanding in the 60s and in the 70s in how urban food production could produce. And this is something what we as the Vertical Farm Institute really would like to bring forward. Some processes we could optimize perhaps, but this is history and future of urban food production. This is how it looked like at the opening days. And this is the vision what we actually have in front of us, and this hopefully would look like in, forgot it, 2026, something like that. Okay, but with this, I would like to conclude, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's always a pleasure listening to you, and you talk very fast. I'm very impressed by that.
I was waiting for 20 minutes.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We've talked quite a bit about sustainable food production, and Daniel has already touched upon it. There's another problem: waste. An estimated 1/3 of all food, eatable food, produced for human use is lost or wasted each year. And if you break that down on an individual level, it means that every one of us, on the average, produces 173 kilograms per year that are wasted, and they land in the trash. I think that is really shocking. And our next speaker, Katharina Unger, who is the founder of Livin Farms, has a solution for that. Livin Farms is a Hong Kong-based company that empowers consumers not only to grow their own protein at home, but also to recycle their food waste into fertilizer and proteins. So we would like to hear more about that. Katharina, very, very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Here you go. That's fine.
Is this the right one? Yeah, okay. Thanks so much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm based in Vienna as well since this year. So I split my time between Hong Kong and Vienna. It's very nice to be talking in Austria, in my home. Again, and see all these cool faces from all over the place. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing at my company. So I've actually founded two companies. One is Livin Studio and the other one is Livin Farms. And at Livin Studio, we're like a think tank, and we like to explore the very far future of how our food could be grown, produced, or consumed even. So we, for example, did a project on growing fungi on plastics. So the fungus can digest the plastics, and then we can eat the fungus. That's ongoing research. And what I'm doing commercially is Livin Farms that you see on the right-hand side, and there we try to empower people to co-create a healthy planet together with us, and we do this with the power of insects. My background is in industrial design, so I come from a creative field. I studied under this amazing person who created the first Apple Macintosh. So I come from a product development standpoint, and that's how I look at food. So not like a chef, not like a biologist, but really from kind of a very tangible standpoint of how we interact with the ways we grow or consume food. During the time of my company, we went through concept over to prototyping, piloting, researching. We put a product on the market, and now we're going towards industrialization. So in our company journey, I always find it very interesting to look back to all these different phases of what we've been doing to really reflect on how can we innovate a food system rather than just one piece of the puzzle. So I'm going to talk and touch upon all of these things. But first of all, I wanted to ask you, do you know this guy? Yeah. That's so cool. When I talk here, people know him. So that's Pumuckl, and he was my brother's and mine, my favorite character when we were kids. And the reason why I'm bringing him up is because he sort of became like the symbol of ethical eating meat in our family. So I grew up in the southeast of Austria, on the Hungarian border, and my parents had an organic farm with cows, and that's actually my brother, and that's our first calf, and of course we called him Pumuckl. So we got cattle because we had a lot of land around our house, and my parents thought, well, it's kind of a lot of tedious work to just cut the grass, so they wanted to have something that eats the grass, and my dad loved beef. So when one day this became Pumuckl, my brother and me were like, okay. So ever since that moment of time, that became sort of a running gag in our family that we're eating Pumuckl, and that was the moment also where we never again named one of our cows. So I currently spend half of my year around this place. It's the Dried Seafood Street in Hong Kong. I'm not sure if you've been. If you ever go, you should totally check this place out. It's a street full of crazy seafood, anything you can find in the ocean. And this was actually my start of going back to my roots and rethinking about what I want to do with my professional career. And I'm a diver, so I dive around Hong Kong, and I know that there's not much to see around the ocean of Hong Kong. There's not a lot growing. Every now and then there's a little Nemo passing by, but that's about it. So when I walked there every single day to work, I thought, where does all this come from? What is it? How is it being used? Like, where does all this go? And my local friends usually couldn't really tell me. They would say, well, I don't know. I don't even know what it's called. So up until this day, I actually don't know most of these things around here. But that's when I started to think, how does food actually get to a place like this? And I noticed that, the places where we grow food are very far away from the places where we consume them. And that's how we became very much disconnected to what's behind it. So as we've heard already today, 1/3 of arable land is used only to grow feed for animals, and 80% of antibiotics go into animal production. That causes a lot of waste, and it causes us to go towards a global protein shortage. So we have to double the amount of protein by 2030, while we've already lost 30% of arable land worldwide, and the decrease is continuing. So we're heavily dependent to find alternative ways to grow food on less amount of land, what Daniel already touched upon as well. And one of my favorite quotes with this is that you cannot solve a problem with the same thinking that you used when you created it, which was, let's just separate the ways how we produce, or the locations where we produce food and the locations where we eat food, because it makes sense from an economic perspective. But feed is taking way too much resources, and organic byproducts are plentiful. So that's what we do at Livin Farms. We utilize food waste, which is really the key aspect, and we transform it with our technology to insects that are an alternative protein source that can be used in ingredients for pet food, for livestock feed, also for human food, and fertilizer that's used to, again, grow new food and more fertile land. So the key of this is really that waste conversion is a key job of insects in our nature. So that's what insects do, and only a few of these, so the honeybee, the silkworm, there's a mealworm, grasshopper, and the cricket. Actually, of these insects, only 2 have been really domesticated by people, the honeybee and the silkworm. There's over 2,000 edible insects that can be used for feed or for food in the world that haven't been really domesticated or used as such. So there's a huge variety out there that we could still use as a food source. And this data you might have read about, you might have heard about, that insects only take a fraction of the land resources, a fraction of the feed, a fraction of the water that it takes to grow conventional types of meat, while only producing a fraction of the CO2 emissions as well. And as we've heard already, they're eaten in many parts of the world, and actually you eat them too. So you eat each one of you, about 0.5 kilogram of insects every year. And no, it's not while you ride your bicycle with an open mouth, or you sleep with an open mouth, or anything like that. No, it actually is in your everyday food. It's in your chocolate. There's an average of 1 larva per glass of orange juice. So you do it already, and now it's about doing it a bit more consciously, possibly. In China, this cordyceps, it's a fungus on which a caterpillar grows. It's weighed off with gold. It's so precious, and that's a market in Thailand. Who likes these kinds of foods? Potatoes, sushi, lobster. So all of these foods have been regarded as disgusting or gross before. They went through a thorough rebranding. Potatoes were the food for the poor. Sushi was the workers' food in Japan because it was fish that you could carry in your pocket on the construction site. You could just have it as a snack. And lobster was a cockroach of the ocean. So this is actually a poster. Women of Canada, you can help. Like, let's eat that lobster, finally. It was given to prisoners, actually, before it reached popularity on the inland, while they served it on the train and found out that it actually tasted really nice. And of course, if you don't see it as an insect, which we already heard today, then you can make beautiful dishes out of it and enjoy it just like any other type of protein source. We have a few hundreds of our devices out there in the market today. So our first product was a home farm to grow your own insects to eat. And the idea behind it was that, well, if you go to the supermarket, you only have a certain range of products that you can actually eat. And yeah, they tell you a little bit about maybe how they're grown, but you only have so much choice. And we've talked about vertical farming today already. You can already grow plants and tomatoes on maybe even on the wall of your apartment. But what was really missing is the protein part of it. You can't just eat vegetable the whole time, right? So this really allows you to recycle your food waste that you have in your home and grow healthy proteins on your countertop with knowing 100% what you eat. It's a whole life cycle device, so the whole life cycle of the insect happens in there. We grow the mealworm in there. And that's actually in the home of a customer of ours in Sweden. So you see there's beetles growing in it. They lay eggs. They produce larvae that you can harvest. You freeze them, and then people put it into their smoothies or into burgers, for example. So we spent a lot of time developing this. It started with the first larvae I've ever harvested. It was a different kind of insect. That was the first concept. It was a big vision of how people could conveniently grow their protein in their home. This was published in lots of magazines worldwide and gave me the opportunity to do a lot of cool projects in Hawaii, which was by far the best place to grow insects so far. We recycled fruit pulp there, mango pulp and so on, to make animal feed, so to grow insects on them that then become animal feed. Then I went to Africa together with MIT, where we ran a pilot on a similar technology. So they used a blueprint of this first device on growing insects to build it out of their own materials. So that was in Uganda, Africa. And they have a problem that even though they have a lot of waste, and that's important, so there is a lot of organic waste available, but it doesn't mean that it's always usable or can be used to produce higher value goods. So for example, if you feed fruit pulp or corn or whatever kind of organic waste that they have available there, then you can give it to the pigs, but the piglets won't really grow that well. However, if you give it to insects that can digest it and become a very high quality protein source, then the piglets start growing bigger and bigger and can feed a family. So this was the second version of this device that I showed you before. I went to China. I thought, I'm an industrial designer. I can just go to China and manufacture things, right? So I did, and it was not as easy as I thought. But that was the first trial. And I can tell you just real quick how that works. So the whole life cycle. This one was a fly larva, actually. So the fly is the adult. It lives in this bubble. It can fly around. It needs a lot of space. It doesn't need any water, actually, to perform. It will just smell the food waste that you put in the bottom of the device. So it is provoked to lay its eggs. And the eggs, out of the eggs, the small baby larvae hatch. They fall down, and they eat the food waste. And then again, they will pupate. They crawl up the slanted bottom and harvest in a receptacle. And then from these pupa, the flies grow again. You can put them in the top, and the whole life cycle starts all over again. We ran a Kickstarter on this, so we crowdfunded this whole thing. These are other customers in China and the girl in the UK. We have very enthusiastic customers, one of our favorite ones. And they also, we did an open source, so there's also technology inside. I always forget to say that. So it's a controlled microclimate in there. We control the temperature, the humidity. It's slightly heated, it's ventilated. It really gives the best conditions for the insects to lead happy and healthy lives. So our customers started to transform the code, try to make it a little bit hotter or a little bit cooler, and also started to grow them on styrofoam. Since they have an enzyme in their gut that can digest certain types of plastic, which is ongoing research as well. And of course, that's also customer pictures of ours. They make chocolates and all kinds of really cool stuff. So where do we go from here? That's actually my dad. I think he's a really good model. So we are focusing on actually two streams right now. So the first product that you saw, our mealworm farm for the home, we actually nowadays use it for education primarily. So we're working with a lot of schools. Also, we're starting here in Austria. So far, we've worked a lot in Asia. Since sustainability education becomes more and more important, but it becomes more and more abstract for people to, or especially for kids also to realize, what does it mean? What does a sustainable life cycle mean? And with our device and additional materials, they really learn how does the life cycle of the insect work? What are other insects out in the environment? Why are there even insects out in the environment? What is their place in the ecosystem? And they get to harvest the poop, the fertilizer, put it in their plants to grow. And they collect mealworms for their pets or even for snacking themselves. That's how it looks like. So same principle, you can feed it on organic waste that you have at home, carrot peels, potato peels, you name it. And then you see the larvae, the mealworms. They're called worm, but they're actually beetle larvae. And once they turn into pupa, they're being put on the top. They become beetles. They lay eggs through the perforated tray, and then the whole life cycle starts all over again. So it's a continuous protein production system. And the second thing that we're doing is, we call it Hive Professional, where we work with a retailer to digest bakery waste specifically, so organic, dry waste materials. So we're building a large version of it at the moment, and it will go into pet food, livestock feed, human food, fertilizer, and then create closed loop products that are then can be sold again. So it's really a closed system. And we do this in a decentralized and modular approach, and this is a very new project of ours, so I can't say too much, but our impact will be equivalent to taking 100,000 cars off the road in terms of emission over a couple of years of business plan. So we're very excited about this, and our work is really about innovating the systems behind how we produce or consume food. I really believe that only replacing one protein source with another one is not going to do the job. We really need to look at every aspect along the food chain, how food is produced, wasted, processed, and even consumed, because also the pleasure of how we consume the food is impacting the culture around it, and if we're asking for more or not. So that's it from me today. I'm around a little bit longer, so if anybody has questions, many thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. Super inspiring. I saw your device, I think, 2 or 3 years ago for the first time at the Pioneers Festival, and I'm really impressed what you've achieved. As Katharina already mentioned, all the speakers will be here for a little bit longer afterwards, so please try to approach them after the official part over a glass of wine, because we do not have time for questions in this very full program tonight here in plenary. Let's move on to our next topic. You are what you eat, and we heard about extreme health already. So it's more present than ever in our lives today as we become more and more health conscious. So basically food has to do a lot, if not everything, to do with health. And a lot of consumers, they change their diets, their lifestyles, choosing food that is not only tasteful, but also good for their health. But with recent developments, though, in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the rise of big data, we expect this trend to be lifted to a completely new level. And I'm looking at you, Kirill. I want to welcome on stage Professor Kirill Veselkov from the Imperial College of London, who will tell us a little bit more about the role of AI-driven precision nutrition.
Thank you.
So, stage is yours. That's the clicker. We have two clickers.
Okay, excellent. So. Really inspiring talks today. And I'm leading a computational group at Imperial College. I have to say that I'm a physicist by training, so the food tech is very new for me, but I'm very excited to see so many great speakers today. So let me talk a little bit about health. And I have to start with a really positive thing that thanks to recent breakthroughs in medicine and the exciting innovations, we are now living longer than ever. At the same time, however, we are experiencing a massive growth of chronic diseases, including cancer, neurological, diabetes, and neurodegenerative diseases. With a rapidly aging population, this problem is getting worse. It's driving the healthcare costs through the roof, and we are not necessarily getting healthier. So what is going on? A large part of the problem are poor dietary choices that we make. You have heard many times to eat more fruits and vegetables, but did you actually follow this advice? I myself started a healthy diet a million times, and every time I started it, I found that the second day is always the easiest. Know why? Because by then I had already given up. But recent study, however, clearly point out that the unhealthy diet causes 1 in 5 deaths globally. That is about 11 million lives last year, and arguably unhealthy diet now killing more people than cigarettes. And what's really interesting that it's not necessarily the junk food we eat that kills us, but it's rather a lack of healthy food, such as fruits, vegetables, legumes, and nuts in our modern diets. Well, let's take cancer as an example. And with the way things are, unfortunately, half of us in this room are expected to have cancer at some point in our lifetime. But the good news is that about 50% of all cancers can be prevented by dietary and lifestyle choices alone. And nutrition scientists have made an excellent progress in understanding 6 major nutrient classes on our health and disease. We heard about proteins today, but it's also fats, carbohydrates, minerals, vitamins, and water. However, there is a growing evidence that there are a lot of other molecules from diverse chemical classes that help us to fight diseases. In plant foods, these molecules, the same molecules are responsible for color, odor, and flavor. So, for example, like bitter taste of broccoli, or unpleasant smell of garlic, or dark hue of blueberries. The problem is that our diet is extremely complex. We swallow thousands of biologically active molecules as part of our diet. They interact with the biological processes encoded in our genome and with billions to trillions of microbes that living in our gut. And the number of interactions is huge, and you have a system ferociously difficult to analyze. And I have to say that the classical nutrition scientists have mainly taken reductionist view by studying one type of molecule or one ingredient at a time. But even if you consider 3 out of 10,000 molecules, that already leads to about 1 trillion possibilities. Using these methods alone would be like taking a bike to explore the galaxy. You will never get there. Recent breakthroughs, however, in high-throughput technologies, including genomics, the study of genes, metabolomics, the study of metabolites, and proteins, and proteomics, the study of proteins, have resulted in accumulation of really, really large data sets on drugs, food, and diseases. It is, however, beyond any human capacity to get insights from this vast amount of data. So my team and Joseph is here. As part of it, we've been developing next generation machine learning, artificial intelligence, and supercomputing technologies to get actionable insights from large data sets on drugs, foods, and diseases. So, for example, to identify drug-like molecules in foods that help us to prevent or beat disease phenotypes, such as cancer. And let me just show you one example of our study. So this is an animation showing that how we used existing anti-cancer drugs in existing therapeutics, modeled the effect on biological networks, because they interact with the biological networks to induce the effects. And then, using machine learning, we trained algorithm to quite accurately classify anti-cancer therapeutics, and the model was able to classify 9 of 10 anti-cancer drugs quite accurately. And then we've taken tens of thousands of molecules from foods to process it through this model to identify drug-like molecules in foods that may help us to prevent or fight complex diseases such as cancer. And the way it worked, as I said, that it's applied. It required the development of new type of machine learning algorithms, what we call the network or graph-based machine learning, because classical machine learning techniques, they design for images and not necessarily good with dealing with network or graph-structured data. And as part of that, we have, as part of the team, we have Michael Bronstein, who pioneered the field of deep learning on graphs. And once we learned these molecular networks that currently targeted by existing therapeutics, and this is just part of this network, a very small part of this network, we were able to predict about 110 molecules in our everyday foods that have cancer-like properties. And usually what happens after that you need to do a lot of experimental studies to confirm the findings. But instead of doing that, we've tailored natural language processing workflow to extract the experimental data from the vast amount of literature that currently exists on these molecules. And just to give you the scale, since I started the talk, there were about 2 papers published in cancer research. So, and if you're a really good scientist, you can probably read a good 1 paper a day. So that's why it's not possible to keep up anymore with the literature. So that was very important component of that. So once we've identified the molecules, then we map them onto different ingredients. And here we constructed a network of different ingredients and sized according to the number of different types of cancer-beating molecules we've discovered. And we call superheroes among them as hyperfoods. So we can envision the future where you would produce the food that would have a specific molecular profile that would help you to overcome disease. And I myself, after looking at the map, changed my diet. I started with cabbage smoothies, but they taste not so good. So that's why a part of our team, and he is going to talk a little bit later today, we have Joseph, who designed the first hyperfood for us, which was kimchi, which is a very interesting one because actually the fermentation process itself, it preserves the nutrients and preserves the molecules. And here Joseph actually preparing 250 kilos of kimchi for Imperial College Festival, where we distributed these food samples, and it had a smashing success, I have to say. But the good thing is that to put these large molecular data sets into use, we also needed a huge computing power. And you may have heard about the Moore's law, which states that the computing power doubles every 2 years. And actually, the smartphone in your pocket is now more powerful than supercomputers that put the man on the moon. And how this processing power is used? Well, overnight, it is completely wasted. So what if you could combine the processing power of thousands of smartphones to create a virtual supercomputer? And that's exactly what we did in partnership with Vodafone Foundation, with telecommunication company. We deployed machine learning into the DreamLab app, an app that allows you to donate the processing power of your smartphone to analyze complex data. And by taking tens of thousands of smartphones, we were able to complete the calculation that I just showed you before in a couple of months' time, instead of decades that would have taken us to do it on a desktop PC. So this is, as Joseph likes to put it, for the people, by the people. And I wanted to show a quick advert of our project.
Have you heard back? So I'm guessing I play a superhero in it? Flying, gliding, all that stuff? Oh, an ordinary guy. An ordinary guy, you know what? I like it. An ordinary guy fighting a one-man war against enemies from space. Against cancer. Okay, I see it. It's more emotional. It's more in-depth. This is my moment to shine. This is my inner actor. I'm just gonna use my phone. One man, one goal, one phone. I like it. I'm gonna be a sidekick to an app that helps to fight against cancer while I sleep. You know what? I'm in. Oh, I'm in. Hey, I'm John Boy. I'm John Boy.
Excellent. So please download the app, and the person who was actually presenting is John Boyega from Star Wars, and we launched the project actually on May the 4th. last year. So may the force be with you. And as guys in my team told me that he's the only one who actually financially benefited from this project. But there are a lot of people to acknowledge. Joseph is here in the audience, and Michael, we presented with him at TED Talk this Saturday, actually. So it will be out in a couple of weeks' time as well. But as part of our team, we have clinicians, surgeons, we have cancer researchers, we have pharmaceutical sciences, we have analytical chemists, we have health economists, and I wanted to highlight that bringing this multidisciplinary expertise is very, very critical. If you want to provide a quantum leap in the way we design and tailor food to improve and prevent the development of diseases such as cancer. On that note, that's it. Thank you.
Wow, that's impressive. I'm really blown away. This is a completely new dimension of healthy food and changing your diet. And it's basically the perfect segue into our next topic. So this was already about technology. It was about health and technology. And technology plays an increasing role and is actually affecting every aspect of our lives. It has a lot to do with food because we try to manage our diets, but the dieting apps, they seem so old school compared to what we've heard from you. But technology can not only help us having a healthier lifestyle, but it can also help us to design new food experiences. And our next speaker is actually doing just that. I would like to invite on stage Lynette Kucsma from Barcelona-based company Natural Machines. And you guys, you have developed 3D food printing kitchen appliances. And
Correct.
They look very cool, I must say, where you can personalize food, eat healthier, improve kitchen efficiency, and lower food waste. So stage is yours. Lynette, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Is that mine?
That is not yours.
This is mine.
This is yours.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So, we 3D print food. We print it layer by layer, building it up to create beautiful, delicious, and nutritious dishes that are made with fresh, real ingredients. This is 3D printed food, but it's real food. So my name is Lynette. I am a co-founder of Natural Machines. We're based out of Barcelona, Spain, and we make kitchen appliances. A little bit about why we're here, because we do have competitors. 3D food printing is an industry. There's quite a bit of companies working on this. We've been doing this for 7 years right now, and we've been very honored over the years to have over 30 awards and recognitions, including having Foodini being named as a top 10 food innovation that will change the world, and having Natural Machines being named as a top emergent health and wellness startup. But I want you to pay attention to the health and wellness bit, because that actually does really apply to 3D food printing. This is Foodini, our 3D food printer. We were supposed to have it here on this table for you tonight to show it to you in person, but we had a little bit of an issue with airlines and airports, so we arrived as the people. The machines and the luggage stayed in Barcelona, I think. I don't know where it is right now, so hopefully we'll get that back soon. So unfortunately, we don't have it here today. We were going to do some demos, and I do not have any videos in my presentation because the plan was to show it to you live, so we'll do the best we can with our photos. But 3D food printing, it's really not that crazy of an idea, because if you think about the fact that if you eat any packaged food, you're already eating 3D printed food. What a food manufacturer does is they take food, they push it through machines, they shape it, they form it. We took that concept and we created a kitchen appliance that looks beautiful in any kitchen. But the big difference is we ship with empty stainless steel food capsules. So this is your food you're putting into it. You're becoming the manufacturer now. And those capsules come with different nozzle sizes. So you can print different food textures. There's a fallacy that people think everything has to be a puree to 3D print. Not true, at least not the way we do it. Sometimes it's easier to describe what we're not. So I think everybody knows what this is. Can you forget about this for the next 7 minutes? This is not what we do. We are not like the coffee makers that force you to buy pre-filled food capsules. Again, we're all about fresh ingredients. So this is currently in the market. We're targeting professional kitchens. It's available globally. We have it on practically every continent. And we're targeting several different markets. These are some of the big ones. So we have restaurants, of course, which we'll get into in a moment. Hotels are looking for differentiators with their food. Healthcare. There is talk about, not just targeting the young generations, but the older generations as well. We work with hospitals and senior living centers to help print food for people that have trouble swallowing foods. This is where soft textures actually comes in handy, because typically these people eat a bowl of mush, for lack of a better term, but it's been proven that when we print it and it looks like real food, that they enjoy it much more. They get to sit with their family and everybody looks like they're eating real, proper food. So visualization is very important. We work with government bodies. We're working with ESA, European Space Agency. So we're looking at the next gen of going to space and Mars. We're working with food companies. Food manufacturers and food service providers are looking into 3D printing because they see a future where it's not just you going into a supermarket and buying packaged food that's made for the masses, the same nutrition for everybody who buys that box. They're looking to customize nutrition in the future. And there is the sustainability aspect. 3D food printing actually lowers food waste. I'll get into that a bit more later. So why are professional kitchens interested in 3D food printing? Well, there's a number of reasons, but one of them is this. It allows you to create food presentations that are simply not possible by hand. So food presentations are important when people eat. There's also an automation standpoint. So to help kitchens become more efficient, to help with plating, and to do service. We have a restaurant in Barcelona, a Michelin-starred restaurant that has 2 foodinis in the restaurant serving 200 dishes a day, so it's fast. No one's going to wait hours for dinner, right? Everybody's short on time, so we have to make sure 3D food printing is fast. Sustainability is a big thing, so I'm sure you've all heard about the ugly fruits and vegetable concepts or ugly cuts of meat. Not ugly after you print them. We're working with agencies like Matisse in Iceland and working with the fishing industries that have a lot of bycatch, fishes that we don't necessarily eat. It's not the main part of the catch. Or when you fillet a fish, there's a lot of meat left on the bones. Perfectly good food, nutritious, tasty, but we don't like the way it looks, so we don't eat it and we throw it away. That's a total waste. So we take that and we print it and we keep it in the food chain. So with that, we also support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals number 12, responsible consumption and production. So that's one of our main drivers for any product that we put on the market. But our big vision is to be in people's homes in the future. 2050, you'll have a 3D food printer in your house. Why? Well, we don't need to have butter printed in the shape of a head to survive of the human race. Nor do we need to print hummus in the shape of a castle to enjoy hummus. Sometimes I do have to print spinach in the shape of dinosaurs to have my kids eat spinach. But most of these are novelty reasons, with the exception of perhaps the dinosaur one. But there's also a necessity. 3D food printing is not just a novelty, it's needed. Why? The answer to that is in our supermarkets. Aisles and aisles of packaged food. When you look at all those labels on the box, a lot of questions come up. There's additives, preservatives, chemical-sounding ingredient names. Sometimes we literally don't know what we're eating. But when you can replicate that food, when you become the food manufacturer with a 3D food printer, those questions go away. It's your food. You're controlling it, not the manufacturer. But when people think about 3D printing food, they do think the fancy shapes. And yes, we do print quite a lot of those because it's something to show that's very visual. But I ask you not to just think about those. Think about cereal that's in the shape of O's, or crackers, like the fish shapes that are popular with the kids. even spaghetti. All of these are printed, and it's printed with fresh, real ingredients. And it's not just about 3D food printing. It's also about IoT, data, Internet of Things. When you do that, a lot of the topics we talked about tonight become connected because of the data. So you can start doing things like print a dessert that stops printing once it hits 200 calories. And in the future, what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to print food down to the nutritional level if you want to. One of the problems when we talk about the future of tech and food is people automatically think everything will become very technical and mathematical and data. And it can, but it's an option. If you just want to eat without tracking calories, or you just want to have pretty food and lessen your food waste, that's fine. If you're more data heavy and you really want to customize your food, 3D food printers with data capabilities will be able to give that to you. So it's really about options in the kitchen. The thing with food tech is that the tech has to be adopted to you and not just throwing tech on the masses. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of an idea and unmasked the vision, what 3D food printing is about. There's a lot of fear about 3D food printing, or a lot of misconceptions about it not being real food, or I would never eat 3D printed food in the future, even though you're eating it now, if you eat anything from a manufacturer. So my main message for tonight is to keep an open mind about 3D printing food, that it is fresh ingredients. You're controlling it, you're becoming the manufacturer, but it's in a form of a kitchen appliance that's easy to do, which anything that's easy to do, you'll do more often. And that's Natural Machines. Thank you very much.
Lynette, I must say, I want to have one.
Oh, good. I wish we could have some tonight to print for you, but our device is still
I'm going to check it out.
Yes.
We have to talk about this. I really want to have one. Thank you so much. Oh, I forgot my clicker. Can you hand me my clicker, please?
Yes, here you go.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so technology, of course, has a lot of things that it can offer to us, and 3D food printing is certainly one of those.
Yeah, because I think you have speakers next.
So now we would like to move on to a less tangible but still very, very important aspect of food, culture. And if you look back in time, food culture had a lot to do with where you came from. Spaghetti in Italy, sushi in Japan, and so on and so forth. But globalization now actually is blurring the lines between local and global. Everything is available everywhere. It's quite true. And now we live in a time where Chinese eat Italian food cooked by a British chef. It's very true. And I went to Jamie Oliver in Taiwan. So it's all over the place. And the question is, there's still food culture out there. But what does food culture mean in a globalized world? And our next speaker is Susan Joy. And I think it's fair to say that she is the personification of contemporary food culture. I know Susan for like 10 years. I think she's Korean, born in Germany, grew up in Los Angeles, worked in a trend industry in New York City, finally moved to Berlin, my favorite city, by the way, and switched careers and became a food entrepreneur. How amazing is that? Welcome on stage, Susan Joy. Please share with us your take on food culture in a globalized world.
Good evening, everyone. Is this my clicker?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah.
So let's see. Well, thank you, Verena, very much for that introduction. She basically did my first slide for me. And I definitely want to talk kimchi later because I love kimchi. So I think next 10 minutes is going to be a little bit of a departure from kind of what we've been talking about. But I'm just kind of here to share with you my perspective in terms of trends, what's happening culturally, a little bit of cultural anthropology, and times this food industry. So as Verena mentioned, I'm born in a very small rural town in Germany where I was the Asian community. And then after that, my parents decided to chase the American dream. And they've said, oh, Los Angeles is this place with loads of Korean people. We'll go there and chase the American dream. So because it was before technology, basically, there was no Google, there was no Google Maps, we ended up in the Mexican area of Los Angeles. So then I was the Asian community within the Mexican community, but I could only speak German. So this gives you a little bit of background of who I am. After that, I moved to New York, and that's where I started my marketing career. I spent the last 20 years working in marketing, mainly thinking about trends, thinking about foresight, thinking about cultural anthropology, as I mentioned, and that led to a lot of work within the food and beverage industry. And I think it's been a fascinating 20 years. So I know we are talking about the future, but I think it's really important to kind of understand the landscape that we're in right now when it comes to food and when it comes to the culture of food. I guess the best way that I could put it is that the trajectory of food and the trajectory that we're currently on, the most interesting way to put it, I guess, is that food or being a cook or being a chef used to be very blue collar, right? I'm a cook. It wasn't really like, you didn't really talk about it. It was a 9-to-5 job. You went in, you chopped your onions, you cooked your food, you threw some food on a plate. 20 years later, that blue-collar job has really transformed into becoming a rock star. If you're a cook now, a chef now, you're a celebrity. You're signing cookbooks, you're selling out stadiums, people are watching you cook, and it really has become kind of this aspirational job. So what I want to do today in a very short amount of time, is I want to talk about the intersection of food and culture. So what is the attraction? Why are we here talking about food? Why has food become such this kind of celebrity, popular social currency? We all want to be a part of it. I think there are three things when we talk about the intersection of food and culture, and one of them is attainable aspiration. So food is attainable, right? We can all kind of participate in this. Well, we all eat food, number one, right? But we can also kind of have these aspirations to maybe cook a little something. Maybe we're even at home, like chopping our onions, and we try to do the flip on our own. So there really is kind of this attainable aspiration feeling around food and culture, which is why it's become kind of such a big part of who we are today. The second thing is, what I think is really interesting is that food is democratic. What I mean by that is we all have access, whether what culture you are, whether what kind of ethnic background you come from, and for the most part, regardless of the socioeconomic background you come from, we kind of all have access to food. So let me ask this question. How many of you know what a hamburger is? I'm pretty sure every single person in this room knows what a hamburger is, right? And that's the beauty of food, and that's why I think food is democratic. Everybody has access to it. Everybody knows what a hamburger is, and therefore we're all connected by a hamburger. The last but not least thing is what I like to call delight demand. When it comes to the intersection of food and culture, it is attainable, as I mentioned. We can basically instantly attain this. And at the bottom line, it is delight. It gives us joy. It gives us happiness. It brings people together. And I think a lot of those things we can't really forget when it comes to when we're talking about food and when we're talking about culture. So just to kind of briefly bucket this idea of food and culture, I think kind of the heartbeat of all of it are the 3 C's. So I think today when we talk about food, it really falls under the 3 categories of community, consciousness, and choice. So when it comes to community, it's fairly simple, right? I guess the easiest way to put it is that food is a way, it's very easy way to give us entree into other cultures. So, for example, the professor before talked about kimchi. Instant connection, right? I was like, oh my God, he's talking about kimchi. I know that. So there is, food allows us the opportunity to have empathy with other communities, other heritage, which then really gives us certain touch points into other communities and other cultures. So I think that's why food is one of the most important things to me under this idea of community, is that it gives us entree into other culture. And I think in this day and age, it's really, really important to have that. The second thing is heritage and tradition. So under this idea of community, you know, we talk about heritage, where we come from, we talk about diversity and all of these things. And food was also really important for me because it was literally the way that I figured out who I was. You know, with my crazy background, food was the way that, as I said, entree into culture, where I understood my Korean heritage, where I understood the German culture, where I understood Mexican culture, where I understood what it meant to be American. All of these things came from food. The burger, the kimchi, the schnitzel, the spätzle, all of that. Then the other thing is tradition. I think that food is a multi-sensorial living story that can be shared and passed on. I think as we talk about the future and all of these things, we also should think about kind of the human side of things, right? How will we pass on traditions? How will we pass on heritage? How are we going to pass on these knowledges that our past generations have had? So heritage and tradition, also a very kind of important piece when it comes to this aspect of community. And last but not least, obviously, with community, there is a sense of belonging. And as I briefly discussed, and as we hear a lot today, all of these things that bring us together, whether we like spicy foods or whether we love garlic or hate garlic, those things kind of bring us together and give us a sense of belonging, which again is also incredibly important in kind of this world that we live in today. That is community. The next C is consciousness. I'm not going to talk a lot about climate change because I am not apt to really kind of get into it, but from a food and culture perspective, obviously it's something like when you work in the food and beverage industry, we're all talking about it. It is a new language. It is a new vernacular. And as I mentioned, food is democratic, which also means that it's political. So within the food and beverage industry, it also has become part of our everyday kind of challenges, whether we think about it and what to do about it in our own very individual way. That also means, we talked about waste a lot. In the food and beverage industry, there's a ton of waste. But obviously, as I mentioned, there are ways that we're thinking about how to tackle these wastes. So obviously, we kind of all are familiar with getting rid of plastic, no more plastic straws at Starbucks and all those things. And I think that's great. Those are very kind of individual things that we're talking about. For me personally, when I think about waste, I work in a bar, in a restaurant, and we press fresh citrus every single day. And actually, most bars and restaurants do that. In the past, it was the kind of thing where you press your citrus, at the end of the night, if you have leftover, it kind of just goes in the trash, right? But now we're kind of living in this new consciousness world where it's almost a challenge, a creative and innovative challenge of what you do with that waste. And for us, what we do is we take the waste of the citrus, we turn them into popsicles, and that go back into our cocktails. We do a lot of egg white drinks, so most of the times at a lot of bars, they'll use the egg white and they'll toss the egg yolks. We'll take that egg yolk, we'll turn it into mayonnaise, or we'll dehydrate it and smoke it and then use it as garnish for our drinks or for some of our dishes. So that's kind of some of the interesting ways that we're thinking about zero waste when it comes to a restaurant and a bar perspective. The next is social agency. So what I just want to briefly say about that in terms of food and culture is that we, and by we I do mean the collective we really care about what other brands and products stand for. We're completely conscious, knowing and wanting to know that my values, our values, whatever values that we have, align with the values of the brands that I use, the products that I use, and I think about that every day. Every single spirit that I have in my bar, I think about the brand and where they come from, what they stand for, who they stand for. And that's how we make decisions today. Quickly, let's go to the last C, which is choice. I think choice for me, basically, just to break it down really quickly, because I have to leave soon, is the reality of things. And the reality of the matter is that the paradox of choice lives on, but we are faced with these new choices every single day due to this kind of consciousness piece, right? So I really want to have that burger because I love burgers, like it's so juicy, delicious with the cheese and all of that. Or do I make the conscious effort and eat the Impossible Burger because it's better for the environment, it's better for me? I don't know, but then what's in that lab burger? So we're constantly kind of faced with these choices, which then leads us to this idea of having to restack our values. So the state that we're living in with food and culture is that we're constantly negotiating with ourselves, right? We're re-evaluating our values and continuously, constantly shifting them. So it's not that we're always going to be perfect and always have that Impossible Burger, because sometimes, because of delight, demand, and because of joy, we're going to want to eat a regular burger, and that's okay too. It's just that that is what we are going through as consumers and end consumers today. And in terms of food and culture, that is the reality of it. So I guess last but not least, what I want to say is I'm a person that definitely gets it. I get the consciousness. I am all about zero waste and all of that. But honestly, at the end of this conference, I'm going to go get that big Sachertorte that I know has too much plastic wrapping around it, way too much packaging. I'm going to put it on a plane home with me, and I'm going to eat it because, on the other hand, it's also delight, demand, and it also gives me joy. Thank you very much.
That was great. Isn't it great? And I also love Sachertorte, and I love sweets. And my team knows that I'm the biggest consumer of chocolate in our office, unfortunately. Anyway, Susan touched upon a lot on our next topic. Food is a treat. Food is so much more than just putting energy into our bodies. And Cécile mentioned it, this funnel, when you go through and everything is put into you and you don't have to eat anymore. For me, it's not a very pleasant thought, if you will. So it's really a sensory activity that we all enjoy so much. And so we have a pretty good idea of how food experiences look now. But the question is, what can we expect in the decades to come? Is there something new that we can experience? Or was that it already? Probably not. So I would like to welcome on stage our guests from the UK. And I must say it's an interesting couple, an Oxford professor and a chef. And the chef was mentioned by Kirill several times before. So welcome on stage Oxford professor Charles Spence and chef Joseph Youssef. And I'm really, really interested in hearing more about gastrophysics. This clicker, right?
Thank you. Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here, the chef and the scientist. I come from Oxford, Professor Charles Spence, a psychologist interested in food and the senses and the future of food. And I've been lucky enough to work with Chef Joseph, you see here, for the last 5 or 6 years. He, a chef who takes the insights, I think, from the science and the emerging technology, but turns them into delicious dishes that people want to talk about, return to, sample again. And it's really great to see how the insights from the lab can be transformed into delicious, memorable, Instagrammable dishes of the future. And that sort of innovation, I think, I've come to find, happens much faster working with chefs who are less constrained, perhaps more creative than it ever did with many of the food companies with whom our lab, say in Oxford, has been funded over the years. So the chefs are less constrained, can be more creative, and we'll give you a few examples of where that creative collaboration between the scientist and the chef has taken us over the years. But we'll start, though, with kind of going back before we go forward, because I think we're not the first to think about the future of food, be it in 2030, 2050 or somewhere else. But if you go back to the closing years of the 19th century, to the 1880s, 1890s, you find feminist novelists like Anna Dodd, sort of science futurists like Arthur Dove, writing books about the future of the United States a century from now in 1985. And all of those authors, together with the chemists of the time, were imagining the future of food would look like this, the meal in a pill. For the feminist writer, it would free female kind from the kitchens. For Arthur Dove, it made perfect sense when we heard earlier from the first talk this evening about time as a new currency. And back then they were thinking, why on earth would a busy businessman of a century hence, 1985, spend an hour masticating a multi-course lunch when they could take a meal pill, a meat pill, a soup pill, followed by a dessert pill, and carry on and be more productive as a result. And yet it hasn't come to pass, this idea of the meal in the pill. The futurists thought about it too, as did it appear in the Jetsons. But what this meal pill misses, even though it may capture the nutrition that we need, is the experience. There's no experience around the meal in the pill, and that's why it has not succeeded. That is why the astronauts thinking about going to Mars say you can mess with anything, but not the food. Do not give us a meal in the pill, no matter how much more efficient it might be, because meal times are social experiences that help to bond the crew together. And as we go through from that century forward, we've heard already about 3D food printing. You may already have come across in the press examples of this digital tasting, the idea that you can put a spoon or the Vocktail, the virtual cocktail glass, to your lips, and somehow magically, through electrocuting your tongue and lips, perhaps heating up a little bit, you will have this taste sensation, and you can deliver the sweetness that you want without any of the calories. But I suspect this sort of technology doesn't really work, if it works at all, only in a small number of people. And from a chef's perspective, I guess, as you might say, you really need some of these ingredients to help the structure of a dish. You can't just take them out. Another example of the future that we've seen in recent years, and we saw it already in a couple of the presentations already, is kind of the robot chef, from the quantum of the seas, that can perhaps deliver 500 or 1,000 cocktails an hour on the high seas, perfect precision made each and every time. And yet, I think this is not what we want. It lacks the theatre, at least after the first time, of real cocktail making. This robot does not have a robot nose, it does not have a robot tongue, and it certainly can't combine those absent senses to deliver robot flavour. What it means is this robot cocktail maker has to use pre-made ingredients, the lime juice, not the fresh lime, because it can't sense quite how the ingredient will appear in the dish. And it's for that reason, and the lack of theatre, that I think so many of the cocktail makers that we work with aren't worried about this taking over their jobs. It's serving a very different function, much more close to kind of the production, mainstream production of food. And there's something about, I think, what say, Chef Joseph produces, which is around this idea of the cult of inconsistency. We don't want exactly the same thing every time. If that was what we wanted, I suppose, we'd just order some microwave meal from the supermarket. It would be identical each time. But instead, as Tim Hartford has written, what we value sometimes when we go out to eat is kind of the hand of the maker. And we know the hand of the maker is there by that sort of variation in the output. Sometimes Joseph will be in a good mood and things will taste absolutely amazing. Sometimes he might be in a bad mood and things will taste a little bit different. But that variation is part of the value of real food experiences. So too, I don't think Joseph's thinking about getting a robot memento machines in his kitchen any time soon. And that in fact, probably the only prediction about the future of food that at least we have been able to see come true over the last century or two is from Isaac Asimov here, writing about the World's Fair from the 1960s, imagining a future when kitchen units will be devised that will prepare auto meals, heating water and converting it into coffee. The electric coffee maker, imagined all those years ago, and that's about the only example of the future of food. As such then, perhaps you should not listen to anything that we say, given that we can't really trust, especially as things are speeding up even faster, as we heard again from the first talk. Maybe that makes our predictions even more distant from the truth of the situation. But instead, what I want to talk about with Joseph is about the experience of food and try and think about how we might engineer multisensory food experiences and how Joseph does that night after night, that bring together the senses of the diner, that build on the science of the mind of the person doing the tasting, and that sort of resolve this issue of why it is that nobody likes a soggy potato chip. This is a title of a science article from 2001. It has the nutrition, it has the sugar, the salt, the fat, it has everything. All it lacks is the sound of the crunch. And yet the sound of the crunch doesn't carry any nutritional value. So why are all our snack foods crispy, crunchy, crackly, and the like? That's part of the experience of food. And it's what got me initially interested in the design of food, working with Unilever at the time to virtually prototype potato chips and show that we can make potato chips, or crisps as we call them, 15% crunchier or fresher or more liked simply by changing the sound of the crunch as our participants bit into those products. That was industry-funded food research that then led off to P&G, Unilever, Nestle, and the like, using this virtual prototyping to design new food products in-house. But this was my first kind of experience with a chef, and it learned in the other way to the chef taking the idea that sound might be the forgotten flavor sense, a key part of our experience and enjoyment of food and drink. And the chef Heston Blumenthal from the Fat Duck in Bray took that insight after he came to the lab and developed this, the signature dish, on the menu at his 3 Michelin star world-leading the Fat Duck restaurant. A dish that comes to the table looking like the seashore with sashimi, sand, foam, and seaweed. And on the other hand, the waiter brings a conch shell out of which dribble some earbuds, and the diners are encouraged to put those earbuds in before they have the seafood. And in that act, we've demonstrated with the chef that seafood tastes significantly better, but no more salty, with the sounds of the sea than with jazz music, with restaurant cutlery noises, or anything else. This, for us, is one of the first examples of technology being brought to the table and how the chef's perspective on the future of food can take the science in radically different directions than I think the food industry has heretofore thought.
So I am, as you've heard a couple of times this evening, Chef Joseph Youssef, and I'm the founder and chef patron of Kitchen Theory. We're an experienced design studio based in London. They've been working with Professor Spence to understand the sensory relationship that we as human beings have with food. Some of the most interesting insights that have shaped the way that we design our experiences and the way that we design the food experiences for our guests is understanding that our senses, that we think of flavor as being a construct of 2 main senses, that being our sense of taste and our sense of smell. But the research with Professor Spence has led us to understand that actually it takes all 5 of our senses to come together in a congruent way for us to really be able to appreciate flavor. And so when you start taking into consideration, and not just that, but also the fact that your senses work together, so they work in unison, they don't just work in isolation, and that augmentations in one of the sensory inputs in a meal experience can have a knock-on effect in all the other parts of how we actually perceive the flavor, how we enjoy the experience. And so this, as a chef, when I first met Professor Spence, you know, we're very focused on using great ingredients, great techniques. You know, I was fascinated by the science of cooking, but then I realized that there's a science of dining. There's a psychology behind this. And once you start realizing that sound and texture and the visuals and all these other elements and senses play a role in how you actually enjoy food, well, then that starts to make you think about designing dishes and designing food experiences in a completely different way. But I'm not just talking about designing experiences in restaurants, because that's lovely, but there are lots of chefs on that case. But what about designing food experiences at home, at schools, in care homes, in hospitals, that in some way elevate experiences, make them more engaging, are designed in a way that give the sensory cues that nudge people towards making more sustainable, more nutritious food choices? being able to reduce the amount of, let's say, sugar, being able to reduce the amount of salt, being able to take into all consideration a lot of the interesting ingredients that we've heard about this evening, like algae, like insects, perhaps even jellyfish. Maybe taking ingredients like this, but framing them in a way that actually people find delicious, that people really want to engage with, and that they will enjoy. Because when you look at a lot of these ingredients, and we've heard this throughout the evening, that behavior, changing behavior is a big part of it. Because as a chef, I know that, there are as chefs, we can take ingredients. It doesn't really matter what they are, and we can turn them into something delicious. You saw the example of something like lobster. There's examples of the Patagonian toothfish. No one wanted to eat Patagonian toothfish until they renamed it Chilean sea bass. So there's a big part of it comes down to how we perceive foods. And as chefs, we can make them taste delicious, but a lot of it has to do with how people relate to the food. And so understanding this kind of sensory psychology and the relationship that we have with food will undoubtedly allow us to design better food experiences in the future. So this dish, very quickly, talk about jellyfish. So jellyfish is probably one of the most sustainable foods that we could be eating. We know we've overfished the seas and oceans. We know we need to find alternative sources of protein and seafood. Jellyfish is a very high contender because they're blooming in numbers. We've killed off a lot of their natural predators. We've disrupted the ecosystem. The rising temperatures of the seas and oceans and the fact that they're quite resistant to pollution means that they are thriving while other types of marine life are dying. So they're an invasive species. They've done everything from raid salmon farms and kill off 70% of the stock. They've caused naval bases, power stations out at sea to fail and cut off electricity, and they've even disrupted US naval bases. So some say they're not all that bad, come on. Now, the point being, for most Western people, what's the problem with eating something like jellyfish? Because it's a huge multi-million-dollar industry already built in Asia. They'll eat it as noodles in many parts of China, Japan, South Korea, many parts. What's the problem that most people in the West would have? Texture. Yes, texture is the number one thing that most people will say. It's simply a matter of removing the F from jellyfish and it becomes jelly-ish. But it's not. It has a satiating bite or crunch. And when we found when we first tasted it, we thought, actually, this has a really interesting texture. You hear the crunch as you're eating it. It's nothing like the rubbery, slimy type of texture that most people would assume that it is. So we went back to Professor Spencer's research on the soggy crisp, and we started thinking, well, let's take that one element that we know that people probably are going to be apprehensive about, that being texture, and let's enhance that. Let's make that more salient in their mind in some way. And so together we worked with the IV Group, who are an audio branding agency in the States, to design a soundscape that our diners, so you have to bear in mind as well, our diners are sitting at a projection map table, immersed into the dish as an experience, and then they're handed headphones on which they will hear and this was designed so that you can hear the crunchy kind of textures that go through. And what we found was that through immersing people in this kind of an experience, because most people will turn up and we have an opt-in or opt-out. They can eat the jellyfish if they want, or they don't have to. We're not forcing people, not forcing these ideas upon people. But once people are in the right experience, once they're exposed to an ingredient in the right way, all of a sudden it becomes something delicious. And most interestingly, most people who leave our chef's table would say that they would eat jellyfish again. Another quick note, but we've touched upon this, I've heard a few people talk about it, but insects, again, this idea of, honey sounds great, bee vomit less so. So a lot of it has to do in how you present the idea of eating these kind of ingredients. And it's interesting to see that there are kind of different levels of entomophagy, that kind of eating insects. So you can start with, things like bees. Bees are very relatable. We like the idea of bees. They're kind of cute and lots of cartoons around them. So we feel we can relate to that in some way. Bee pollen, honey. But then then you have the kind of secondary level, which is something more like grasshoppers, crickets that live on farms. We can be comfortable with that. But then you have that kind of third level, which is going towards more of the cockroaches and stuff like that, maybe people have a negative association with. So a lot of it has to do with as well phasing people into eating these foods, and that's a great way of kind of changing the behavior around it.
And doing it through the science of the senses, rather than telling people it's good for you or it's good for the planet or both, which don't seem to change behavior so much. And in Joseph's menu, there are 9 courses, 6 of which involved insects, and a whole range of psychology and kind of gastrophysics underlying that, to start with the first 3 courses with no insects, and then have insect dusting on the plate, but it's not something you eat. It's kind of next to the food. By course 4, the insect dust was over the thing that you were eating, and by course 6, you've got a crispy chapelin there by your dominant hand, and you're ready to go for the full experience. And it's really this kind of interface between sort of the science of eating and of consuming and the culinary artistry that can make those initially unappealing ingredients more so that's such an exciting part of, I think, of the way in the future we will nudge people to many of those new foods that we have heard about tonight, including also, I think, kind of the vertical farms, this from Plenty in California, who I was with a couple of months ago there. I can see all the business cases we saw this evening for vertical farming in many places. And yet I think there's a whole bit of psychology there too around how will the consumer relate when farmer so-and-so is no longer in the picture and when your lettuce has been grown from start to finish by robot. Do we like that? Do we not? How do you sell the benefits in order to nudge us in towards this alternative moving forwards?
So I mentioned briefly this idea of designing food experiences, not just for weird and wonderful dining experiences like we do at the chef's table or many restaurants around the world are doing now, but what if we could channel this research towards designing food experiences that engage people in schools, care homes, hospitals, because we know that a lot of the kind of nutritional issues that we have, aside from when we talk about kind of global obesity, even in very developed countries, we know that, in England we have a huge problem with childhood obesity. Even now it's becoming where we have a term which is super obese children. But on the other end of the spectrum as well, someone mentioned, and I think it was Kirill, you mentioned earlier about the idea that we're living longer now, that we need to find foods and way of feeding people, the elderly as well, looking at how can we engage them through designing foods in a more sensorially kind of pleasing way that appeals to them and increases the overall nutritional intake.
And this again sort of building a sort of a Huel-based ice cream that you see on the screen there, served to some diners from an English care home, built on the idea that, in fact, when you look at many of the older people, my mother included, who died recently from dementia, who never liked ice cream all her life, the one kind of sensation that she liked in the final 6 months was the coldness of ice cream. And yet I could see in the care home how ice cream is seen as a horrible, horrible, sugar-packed, unhealthy, childish food, and yet this was a sensorial template that she and many others craved. And hence the challenge for the chef was then how to take the latest culinary technologies and insights in order to deliver delicious, savoury ice creams with nutritional benefits that then throws you back into the psychology of, you had a tomato soup, Heinz tomato soup ice cream, a nostalgic flavour from the 60s or 70s when these characters may have been growing up. But I've never had a tomato soup ice cream before. And as such, I'm in a kind of a disconfirmed expectation. My mind is in a funny place, and so there's still psychology here to get these characters to eat better and to play to their particular sensory profile. Both also to build up on that point from earlier about solitary dining, and that when we look to the 2030, 2050, the proportion of the population who are living and eating alone is just predicted to continue to rise and rise. And we've heard about that already. And I think that's going to cause the real big challenges for food, because those who eat alone tend to have more depressed mood, tend to eat less well, either overeating or undereating as a result of their worse emotional state. And as we see the figures now of 45, 46% of Swedes living alone, that in Japan the elderly may eat 75, 80% of every meals every week by themselves. That's the real problem for the future. And this is where technology may come in to help. With things like mukbang we see here, kind of the bizarre Asian trend from Korea, but then spreading out across Asia and beyond now, of millions of young and not so young people dining by themselves at home while tuning into a broadcast jockey who's reasonably attractive, but not especially so, who is eating huge amounts of food, far more than they need. And there are millions of people doing this every day. This could be the future of food, kind of a virtual dining companion, or what we called in a recent article, digital commensality may be the future. And how food companies, from those who deliver food at home, navigate the kind of social aspects of dining that are being lost, I think is a key and interesting question for the future. But to finish up, we want to come to sonic seasoning, which sort of brings the idea of taking the technology that we all have at home and repositioning it around food. We saw, to begin with, how if you went to the Fat Duck restaurant, the world's top chef brought some headphones to the table for a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But can we take the technology in your pocket, which we've already heard is more powerful than the supercomputer that sent us to the moon all those years ago, and take that technology and connect it to food? And that's the idea behind this, a sensory tasting menu, and in particular, the sound course at the end, a digital sonic cake pop. You can't quite see on the screen here, it says the sonic cake pop. Please take out your mobile device and dial 0845 680 2419 if you want to make your dessert more bitter. Dial a different number if you want to make your dessert more sweet. What? How can you get seasoning from technology? This is, I think, the digital taste of the future. We have a diner in the restaurant where Joseph and I did some of our first work together, eating a bitter, sweet chocolate lolly. And they're listening to one of two soundscapes, which you might think, does that sound sweet? Or does that sound bitter? Bitter, I think most people will say, at least as compared to this soundscape here, more tinkling, more high-pitched. When we ask hundreds, thousands of people in India, America, elsewhere, the majority will say this soundtrack is sweeter. It's not literally sweeter, but it is consensually sweeter. And together with restaurants and in the lab, we've been able to show we can bring out 5% sweetness in a dish simply by playing sweet music. That is sonic seasoning. We now have music for sweet, for sour, for spicy, for creamy, operating in the lab and in the restaurant setting, and it's something that Chef Joseph uses in his experience design too.
Well, we've got 30 seconds. Can we go on to the next one? Okay. Or the next one, because I think that's even...
So, that the sweetest music ever created in a Japanese, a Chinese bar, coffee shop, where they use sweet music to reduce the sugar to help a little bit the obesity crisis.
So, we've got 5 seconds. What do you see? Keep looking. Duck and rabbit. So this is an illusion by Joseph Jastrow, early 20th century. We were interested in this because it begged the question, does what you see as a visual illusion, does what you see on your plate in some way influence what it is that you think you're eating? And we put this on our menu, we put this illusion on the plate, and we gave it to our guests, and we asked them to rate what they thought. We didn't tell them what the elements were on the dish, and we consistently found that those who first saw the duck would imagine that a lot of the elements that they're eating there on the plate were duck. Those who saw the rabbit would name a lot more of the elements that were on the plate as being rabbit. Now, as a little final kind of thing, emotional engagement is super important at our chef's table. So we give our guests a little set of headphones.
I say it's duck season, and I say fire.
So this is a dish, I think, that has it's got a sustainability message. Duck and rabbit both go well together from a chef's perspective, but also we could be eating more of them as an alternative to other food sources. It brings together kind of an illusion from the 1890s that was used initially to popularize science in the general public, and it asks a fundamental question about what do you perceive. We know your vision perceives changes. When the sound changes, duck, rabbit, does your taste change too? And however it plays out, we win, because if the dish flavor changes, this will be the world's first flavor-changing dish. And if it does not, it'll tell the psychologists working back in the lab that flavour is somehow fundamentally different from the other senses, and we need to try elsewhere in figuring out how to deliver kind of the future of extraordinary experience design. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stay with me. Stay with me. So we're at the end of the official part, but before we leave the room, I would like to ask all speakers back on stage for a final applause. Does that get any louder? So I guess with an impressive lineup of speakers, we did not overpromise tonight, and we really, really wish you a nice evening. There's food outside, and there is rebel meat, algae from Helga, as well as insects from Entis that you can taste. So enjoy your evening, approach our fabulous speakers, and engage in conversations about the future of food. Have a nice evening.